Hi guys and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be my slightly late top 10 books of 2021. I have already filmed this video once. I went to edit it and the framing wasn't right, the background wasn't nice, and the first book that I mentioned I got the title completely wrong, so I was just getting bad vibes from that video, so I thought I would just refilm it. I have tried to put these books in a little bit of an order, but I would take it with a pinch of salt because I feel like if you ask me on a different day, these books could be in a completely different order. So don't focus too much on the order, but just know that all of these books come very highly recommended by me. So at number 10, I have Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. This is the second book in the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. I also read the first book in the series in January 2021, and I feel like that probably would have made it into this top 10 list had I not just read Good Girl, Bad Blood in December. This is a YA mystery series where we follow this girl called Pip, who's probably one of my favourite characters that I've ever read. She's super smart, she's super resourceful, and I feel like she's a really just inspiring character. We follow her at high school. She decides to do a school project on a cold case that happened in her town where this girl went missing and she's been presumed to be dead, and a lot of people suspect that her boyfriend, who killed himself soon after she went missing, they think that he killed her. So it's never been proven, but the whole town kind of thinks that this is what happened. But Pip doesn't believe this story and she decides to investigate herself. And then in the second book, we basically follow on pretty soon after the events of the first book, and it goes into some of the things that happened. We see the aftermath. And then we also see Pip investigate a new case where one of her friend's brothers has gone missing. One of the reasons I love this series so much is because Pip is just the best character ever. She doesn't have a lot of angst, which can be a little bit grating with YA. Obviously, as these books are YA, they are kind of light, but they do deal with a lot of heavy topics. And the reason why I love the second one so much in particular is because it definitely gets a lot darker, especially towards the end. I really love the ending for this book. I thought it was perfect. I ended up giving Good Girl, Bad Blood 5 out of 5 because I just loved everything about it. The audiobook was spectacular. It has a full cast of narrators and it has all these little details in it. So when she's doing interviews with people in the town, you can hear like the beep when she starts the tape, and if she's talking to someone on the phone, they make it sound like she's actually on the phone. It's just a really fun multimedia kind of story. We get to hear like her research notes and all these different things. I'm actually currently listening to the third book, which is called As Good as Dead. I'm only like an hour into it, but I'm enjoying it so far. Number 9 on my list is Fallen by Fiona McCready. This is by far the most underhyped book I've ever read. It has something ridiculous like 40 ratings on Goodreads. I don't understand how that is the case. This book starts with a plane crash and we get a very vivid description at the start, which was really emotional, really upsetting. And then throughout the rest of the book, we follow the partners of 2 of the women who die in this plane crash. So in the present day, we're following the husband of one of the women and the boyfriend of the other. And then we also get to read about the past where these women originally met their partners. We see like the last conversations that they had with each other before they got on the plane. And the whole book is just so emotional, so heartbreaking. I didn't cry, but I felt like I was constantly like on the verge of crying, especially towards the end. And having to read these love stories from start to finish is just so sad when you know what's coming. It's really beautifully written. I truly believed in these love stories. I'm not really a fan of romance, but I found these stories really relatable. They felt very real. I loved the characters. I thought there was such good character development. And just the whole story, I just loved it. Basically, I gave this book a 5 out of 5 because I just thought the concept was amazing and I loved how it was executed. I literally couldn't fault it at all. And I would highly recommend this book if you are a fan of romance or just like general fiction. It's definitely not soppy or like smutty or anything like that. It's a very character-focused book. And yeah, I basically loved it and I would highly recommend it if you've never heard of it. Number 8 on my list is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This book is a sci-fi classic. I think it was first published in the 60s, and we're following this guy called Charlie who has a really low IQ. He struggles to make friends, he struggles socially, but he's really passionate about learning and bettering himself. So he's kind of scouted out by these scientists who have been doing these tests on this mouse called Algernon, and they think that they've managed to artificially improve Algernon's intelligence. But now they're looking for a human test subject, and they asked Charlie if he would like to take part, and because he's so passionate about learning, he agrees. This book is told in diary entries right from before he's even met the scientist, and then we see him go through this experiment where his intelligence does increase exponentially, and then we also see how he deals with the realization that the effects of this experiment might not be permanent, because Algernon's intelligence is slowly decreasing, and they fear that that might happen to Charlie as well. So the whole book is told from his perspective, and we get to see his changing intelligence and the way that he writes. This book has a lot of interesting conversations about intelligence and about how there's so many different types of intelligence. It isn't just like book smart. Obviously this book was written in the 60s, so it does talk a lot about the science then and about like psychology. It probably isn't totally accurate now, I don't really know, but I still feel like it has a lot of interesting conversations in there. The reason why I love this book so much and I gave it a 5 out of 5 is because the ending absolutely destroyed me. I was sobbing when I read this book. There was one passage towards the end that just broke me. I like put the book down and was like, are you kidding me? And I was crying my eyes out, but it was a good time because I love when a book can make me cry. And yeah, I would highly recommend this if you want to read a classic that's a little bit more accessible, is very interesting, and could potentially make you bawl your eyes out. Number 7 on my list is The Memory Wood by Sam Loyd. Sam Loyd has quickly become one of my favourite authors this year. I also read The Rising Tide and I really love that one as well, but this one is definitely my favourite. This is another 5-star read for me. This is a thriller where we're following this boy called Elijah, and he lives in this memory wood and it's all he's ever known. However, there's something very sketchy about it. We don't really know why he's there or how he came to be there. But one day this girl called Alyssa is kidnapped and is also brought to the memory wood. And she is a very clever little girl and she's desperate to escape. So she starts trying to speak to Elijah, who has a bit more power in the memory wood. I guess she's trying to trick him into helping her escape. However, Elijah is really excited to have this new friend and he basically doesn't want her to escape. So it's kind of like a cat and mouse situation where Elijah and Alyssa are battling to keep Alyssa imprisoned there. The reason why I love this book so much is because it is so fast-paced and action-packed. The first half of this book, I would say, is a lot of build-up, and I love the way that Sam Loyd writes. He's very descriptive, he's very vivid, but the last half of this book I read in one sitting because I literally couldn't put it down. The action just kept on coming. There's a massive twist in this book which I absolutely loved and it completely threw me. I loved how it ended. I just thought it was so well written, especially for a thriller. I feel like a lot of mystery thrillers focus more on the twists and turns as opposed to the writing, whereas this has just everything in there. It has an amazing twist, it has great writing and great characters, and I think this is one of my favourite thrillers that I've ever read. I don't feel like this is talked about very much online, but I would highly recommend this if you like mystery thrillers, especially ones that are like cat and mouse, kidnap type situations. I thought this was so good. Book number 6 is a bit of a strange one. It's Black Leopard Red Wolf by Marlon James. Now, this is a very different book for me. It is an epic fantasy story. It's a very long book. It's written by one of the most complex, confusing authors I've ever read from. This is my 3rd book that I've read from Marlon James, and he is a very difficult writer to get into. It takes a lot of getting used to when you start one of his books to understand what's actually happening, I think. This book is set in a fictional, ancient, mythical area which has a lot of influence from African mythology. Our main character in this book is called Tracker. He has a really powerful sense of smell. So he is a mercenary who charges people money so that he can sniff people out, basically. For example, a wife who hasn't seen her husband for 3 days, she suspects he's having an affair. Tracker will basically sniff this guy out and find out what he's doing and either convince him to go back to his wife or punish him depending on what the wife wants. Or he also finds like missing animals, missing children. The first like 150 pages of this book, we're looking at Tracker's backstory. It's more building a picture about this world, and then after that Tracker basically gets given this quest to go and find this missing boy, and he's given this quest along with a whole bunch of people, including like a half giant character, a witch, a wolf, and they set out on this quest to find this boy, and they don't really know why he's so important, but they slowly start to realise that things aren't all that they seem. There might be some things that they weren't told about this quest initially. This book was amazing. It took me a really long time to read it because it is difficult. There's long chapters. The writing is quite confusing. Sometimes you don't really know what's happening until you've like read back a bit or carried on and things start to make sense. But the payoff was so good with this book. I laughed, I cried. I was so immersed in this world, and I was so glad that I read it over like a month because I just had this month totally engrossed in this fantasy world. I not really want to read fantasy a lot, so it was totally unexpected for me to give this book 5 out of 5. I just couldn't not. The characters, I was obsessed with them by the end. I didn't want to stop reading this book. I didn't want it to end. There's so much darkness in this book. It's very gory, it's very graphic. There's a lot of monsters in this book that are truly terrifying. I was just absolutely obsessed with it when I read it, and I couldn't stop crying at the end. I cried multiple times. It was just fab. Although I would recommend that you also listen to the audiobook with this one. My favourite favourite way to read this was to physically read it but listen to the audiobook at the same time. I feel like this would be really interesting to reread, which is actually interesting because I've heard that this is going to be a trilogy, but it's basically going to retell the same story but from different characters' perspectives. I've never heard of a series that has done that before, and I think it would be really interesting to go back to these same characters, the same story again, just from a slightly different angle. So I hope that plays out well. But for now, if you want a challenge, if you like fantasy, it is a difficult book, and I don't know if everyone would like it as much as I did, but I would probably read some other reviews of this book first and just see if it's like your thing. So yeah, a bit of a strange one for me, but I absolutely loved it. Book number 5 on this list is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. I read this book for a reading vlog, so I will link that above if you want to see my thoughts as I read this book. But yeah, this has ended up being one of my favourite books. We're following this guy called Ted, who lives in this house with his daughter Lauren and his cat Olivia. He's a bit of a social recluse, and he's previously been the suspect in a missing persons case. There was this child that went missing near his town, and he was one of the suspects whose house was searched. He was cleared, but the missing child's sister, who's now much older, still thinks that Ted had something to do with it. So she basically moves to the house across the road from Ted, and she's planning on watching him. So we're following this sister's perspective, we're following Ted, and we also follow from Olivia the cat's perspective, which sounds weird, but it was amazing and she was my favourite character. It's a very strange book because it doesn't make a lot of sense for a lot of it. And then I'd say when it gets to like the halfway, 3/4 mark, everything suddenly falls into place and it is just perfect. This book is really deeply layered, it's very complex, and I loved how everything came together. I thought the writing was really good as well, and I loved how dark it was and how unexpected it was. There were a lot of twists and turns that I didn't see coming. I never knew fully who to trust and where the story was going, and I loved that. I think this book has been marketed as a thriller, but I would say it's more of a slow burning psychological mystery. I just thought it was such a fascinating book. It was so weird but still so engrossing and compelling. I found it really hard to put this book down. If you are a fan of dark, not horror, but like, I feel like it feels very gothic. So if you're a fan of that kind of vibe, then I would highly recommend this one. So now we're down to the top 4, and I feel like these books are not really in order. I have ordered them, but this could change at any point, trust me. So number 4 on this list is Tender as the Flesh. This is a very gory, graphic, visceral book about a dystopian society in the future where humans can no longer eat any animal meat or any of the products that come from animals. There's been this virus that's gone round and it's now toxic for humans to eat animals. So rather than everyone just becoming vegan, a structured version of cannibalism has now become legal, and humans are now bred and slaughtered for meat so that other humans can eat them. I know it sounds gross because it is, and this book is so deeply disturbing because it is so graphic, it's so gory, it's so jarring to read about, thinking that all of these things that are described as happening to humans are happening to animals as we speak. So I know that a lot of people have had a bad reaction to this book. I know that a lot of people have actually gone like vegetarian or vegan because of this book. So if you're a bit funny about food, or you don't have a very strong stomach, then I would probably avoid this one. But if you like dystopia books, then this is such a good book. I honestly feel like it could go down in history as like a modern classic dystopia. I feel like it's very similar in tone to 1984, Brave New World, that kind of thing. It's told in a very bleak tone where we're following this main character who works in one of the slaughterhouses. He doesn't like his job, but he just kind of goes along with it because that's what he's expected to do. He's good at the job, he makes good money, and he has this level of detachment because the whole society has to be detached from the reality that they are eating humans. They call it special meat. They don't give names to the humans that are being bred. I think they're referred to as like the product or something like that. They basically don't treat the meat as humans at all, and it is so awful to read about, but it's also so disturbing because it seems like it's so far removed from our reality. But also, could this happen if something happened that meant that we couldn't eat animal products anymore? Who knows? I thought this book was amazing. It was so shocking. There were 2 parts in this book where I was like genuinely floored. I thought the main character who we're following was so interesting because I love reading about morally grey characters, and I feel like he definitely fit into that. I think I only gave this book like a 4.5 out of 5, but I feel like I would probably bump it up to a 5-star now because I cannot stop thinking about this book. It's something that has stayed with me really deeply. I would highly recommend it if you can stomach the gross, disturbing elements, but I feel like the whole thing is just so thought-provoking because you just keep thinking, like, how could this be real? Like, could this happen? If you're a fan of dystopia and horror, then I think this book would be perfect for you. Number 3 on this list is another surprise for me because it is a YA mystery, but it was so good. And it's Dangerous Girls by Abigail Haas. This book mainly follows this girl, I think she's called Anna, and she goes on a spring break with her friends. Her best friend is called Alyssa, and she also has a boyfriend called Tate. Don't know if I've made all those names up. But yeah, they go on this spring break, they're having a really good time, they go with a bunch of their friends as well, and then Alyssa is found dead in the apartment. And police quickly start investigating this, and Anna becomes the prime suspect. And then we constantly switch back and forth in time, and by the way that is done is so seamless, it's never confusing, it is just perfectly done. We go back to when they were at school and how Anna met Alyssa in the first place. We go to where she starts going out with Tate. We see some of the different memories from the trip. We see some other suspects. Then we see the aftermath of Anna being a suspect and what happens with like the media and the courts and the police and everything like that. And it is so good. It's one of my favourite YA books ever because it's written so well. I love the structure of this book. And this book, oh my god, did it make me feel. It kind of reminded me of Gone Girl, where we get to see like the media portrayals of Anna and how things that she does get manipulated by the media and seeing like the public reactions to her and stuff. It was just such a scary situation to imagine yourself in. She was in a country where she didn't speak the language, she didn't understand the legal system, and she's being questioned by the police for a murder that she is adamant that she didn't do. The whole situation was so stressful. I was rooting for her so badly. I was getting super frustrated about how she was being treated. I had so many feelings about that part of the book. And then the ending of this book is one of the most shocking things I've ever read. I friggin' loved it. I was absolutely gobsmacked, and the whole ending made me so angry, but in the best way. I was like fuming when I read this book, and I think I even rang my boyfriend or like texted him or something like, I'm seething. This book has just messed me up, and it was such a good read. I read it in summer, and this book is like the perfect summer book. I would definitely read this if you go on holiday. It's hands down one of the best YA books I've ever read, and yeah, I would highly recommend it. Number 2 on my list is another mystery thriller, and it is The Night She Disappeared by Lisa Jewell. This book is perfect. I've read multiple Lisa Jewell books at this point, and this is the only one that I've given a solid 5-star to. In this book, we are following the disappearance of this young couple, Tallulah and Zach. They have a baby together and they basically go missing. I think it's 2 years ago to the present day. There's a police theory that they basically ran away together because they didn't want to look after their baby anymore, and Tallulah's mum knows that that is just not the case. She would never do that. But the case quickly went cold and she's just never known what happened to her daughter. This book basically starts where this woman who's recently moved to the area, she finds a clue that kind of kickstarts the investigation back up again. We also go back to Tallulah's perspective from before she went missing in the months leading up to it. She was my favourite character, hands down. She's the sweetest little angel ever. I just wanted to hug her and protect her. Everything that she goes through in the lead up to her disappearance is just so heartbreaking to read. I just loved her so much and I cared about her so much. Lisa Jewell is just an expert at writing characters that you really care about. How everything comes together in this book is just amazing. I don't want to spoil anything about like Tallulah's perspective, but the whole story for Tallulah, I just absolutely adored how it went. I loved everything about it. I loved all the twists and turns. I thought it was honestly a perfect book. I could not criticize it at all. It had 0 flaws. It was outstanding. I listened to the whole thing on audiobook, and the audiobook was so good. I think it's one narrator throughout, but she puts on such good voices for all the characters. There's this one girl in the book who is super posh, but she manages to be very charming and charismatic, and I thought she just voiced her perfectly because you really fell in love with her character. The voice she put on for Tallulah was so cute and sweet. Just the whole thing was just spectacular and I loved it, and I feel like you should definitely read this book if you like mystery thrillers. I would say it is Lisa Jewell's best book yet. And then the top spot on this list goes to Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. This book changed my world. I have never read a book like this before. I thought it was going to be a standard domestic thriller, and boy was I wrong. This book goes to whole new levels that I've never read before. We basically start this book with this woman who goes on a night out and kisses this guy. When she next goes to work, he walks in and she realises that the guy she kissed on this night out is her new boss. So there's this uncomfortable dynamic between them where they clearly like each other, but it is now like inappropriate. Not to mention the fact that he's married and he brings his wife into work that day. And then our main character, I forgot her name, but our main character then bumps into this guy's wife outside, and they kind of strike up this secret friendship where the wife doesn't want her husband to know that she's got a new friend, and it seems like he might be abusing her, and it might be like a domestic abuse situation. So our main character kind of gets wrapped up in this marriage, and it all just becomes super messy. Honestly, I can't really explain why I love this book except the ending. I loved how this book wrapped up. It was so bizarre, but so impressive. I was so shocked. You will never predict where this book goes. It's literally impossible. There's something about the concept of how it ends that is so terrifying to me. It genuinely creeped me out for days. This is probably one of my favourite endings to a book ever. It's just so stand out in my mind because of how unique it is. I love mystery thrillers. They are my favourite genre to read from, and I've never read anything like this, and I don't think I will read anything like this again. So yeah, this was my favourite book of the year, I would say, purely because of how much I still think about this book, even though I read it in the first half of the year. I would really love to know what you think of this book if you've read it, because I have heard some pretty mixed reviews. However, I happen to be one of those people that just absolutely adored it. So yeah, that is all of the books that I want to talk to you about today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books before, if you want to read any of these books, and also just let me know what your favourite books were this year, because I would love to know. I will also link my worst books of the year video up here because that is already up. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I will hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!